First of all, I want to announce that a couple of hours ago, a very brave fighter whose very own son was murdered by the New York City Police Department was acquitted of all charges. Her name is Juanita Young. Juanita Young has been the target of the police in the Bronx. They invaded her home on November 26, 2006, and they turn around and they charge her with assault, a legally blind woman. They charge her with assault, and they pressed a legal case with 6 different counts. The jury took a little more than 2 hours to acquit her. That's wonderful news, and we have to fight to save the life of Troy Davis. Wasn't it just a little while ago that we were told that capitalism was triumphant, socialism was dead? Forget Karl Marx. Invest your life savings in the stock market. The talking heads aren't emphasizing the investment part anymore. Their banks are even afraid to lend to each other. We were told that globalization was the wave of the future. There's nothing new about capitalist globalization. It started 550 years ago with the African Holocaust. The tens of millions of Africans who were kidnapped and murdered jump-started the capitalist world market, along with the extermination of millions of peoples throughout the Americas. When you hear the words free enterprise, think of the countless number of African children thrown to the sharks in the Middle Passage. Think of the millions killed in Mexico and Peru and so-called New England. The greatest weapons of the invaders of the Americas was smallpox. Hundreds of years before the Pentagon scientists at Fort Detrick were experimenting with anthrax, bioterrorism was being conducted by the European invaders. That's how capitalist science and technology was used. The native peoples in the Caribbean were wiped out. African slaves cut the sugar cane in all those beautiful islands. The profits from this trade became the basis for the Industrial Revolution. It was pointed out by the first premier of independent Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, in a great book, Capitalism and Slavery. Barclays Bank was built on the slave trade. Karl Marx knew this in his bones. He wrote that capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore, blood and dirt. Karl Marx was right. He called this genocide the so-called primitive accumulation of capitalism. But this primitive accumulation never ended. King Leopold of Belgium killed at least 10 million people in Congo for rubber profits. But it was U.S. President Chester Arthur that recognized Leopold's genocidal regime. And today, millions more are being killed in Congo for the raw materials that make cell phones. Capitalism is Hiroshima. Capitalism is Wounded Knee. Capitalism is napalm, gas chambers, and electric chairs. Capitalism is the Korean War with 5 million Koreans killed. Capitalism is 5 million Vietnamese people killed. Capitalism is Dow Chemical making super profits off Agent Orange. Capitalism is Auschwitz. Capitalism is Deir Yassin and millions of Palestinians thrown out of their homeland. Wall Street was also built on slavery. New York City became the financial center of the United States because it was the banker and broker for the Southern slave masters. August Belmont, who married into one of Louisiana's biggest plantation-owning families, was the master of the universe on Wall Street during the Civil War. His son was president of New York City's first subway. There's more than a little bit of Louisiana wealth made by slaves in the IRT. It was for these Wall Street financiers that 1 million Filipinos were killed following the 1898 invasion. The primitive accumulation also included the bloody measures necessary to create a working class in Western Europe. This was when Henry VIII emptied the monasteries in England and thousands were driven off the land. One of the glories of the Protestant Reformation for the capitalist class was it got rid of dozens of holidays. People were supposed to work until they dropped. The reason why no British king has been named Henry since Henry VIII isn't because of his 6 wives. It's because Henry VIII hanged as many as 72,000 people for the crime of being a so-called vagabond. That is, for the act of being homeless. Giuliani would have been one of his lawyers. Actions in terror like this was absolutely necessary to make the masses work for the capitalists. This is how the working class was born. Marx wrote about these bloody acts of the expropriated, as he called it, in his classic work, Capital. Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the capitalist revolution in Britain, killed 80% of the Irish people during his conquest of Erie. Karl Marx also wrote about free trade. It was to the shouts of free trade that narcotics were shoved down the throats of Chinese people during the Opium Wars. One of FDR's grandfathers was a drug pusher. How about some free trade with Cuba? Let's tear down that blockade. Socialist Cuba has what we need, free health care for all. So many lies have been told about Marxism. Marxism is a living science that's been expanded by the contributions of V.I. Lenin, Mao Zedong, Rosa Luxemburg, Amilcar Cabral. The majority of Marxists today live in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The South African Communist Party alone has over 30,000 members. Karl Marx is a great teacher for workers around the world and all oppressed people. He and his followers did everything to get rid of slavery in the United States. In fact, there was even a couple of generals in the Union Army who were followers of Karl Marx. Tell, McCain about that, trying to chase people down. In Capital, his masterwork, his great work, Karl Marx started with a commodity. A commodity is an item or service made or delivered for sale to somebody else. Commodities have been traded for thousands of years. People tried to figure out how commodities could be traded for each other. What was the magic substance that they contained? As Comrade Vince Copeland, a founding editor of Workers' World newspaper, said, that substance was the magic wand of labor. It's only human labor that gives value to anything. This labor theory of value wasn't discovered by Marx. It was actually some astute capitalists like David Ricardo and Adam Smith, both of whom Marx considered to have made contributions to political economy. But he built upon their ideas and refined them. Marx discovered that all the revenue of the boss class, whether it's profits or rent or interest on your credit card, are forms of what's called surplus value. Surplus value is that part of the value produced by the working class that's not paid back in wages. It's simply stolen by the capitalist class, the owners of the means of production. Who gets more surplus value extracted from them than oppressed people in the United States? Black, Latino, Asian, and Arab people, and all around the world. Slaves produced a fantastic amount of surplus value. The amount of surplus value stolen every year from poor and working people in the United States amounts to trillions. Every cent of Bush's bailout, and it's also the Democrats' bailout, is stolen value, surplus value stolen from us. The current economic crisis is also a crisis of U.S. imperialism. For years, the U.S. economy has run what's called a foreign trade deficit. They imported much more than they exported. It amounted to like tribute coming from abroad. It was like the corn chips coming from Africa to feed ancient Italy and the Roman Empire. They could do that because of the strength of U.S. imperialism. But these foreign trade deficits also came from a result of deliberate deindustrialization. 50 years ago, there were close to 1 million manufacturing jobs in New York. That's fallen by over 800,000. It wasn't just because of economic means that this fell. It was a political measure to try to drive particularly black workers out of basic industry, out of the big factories. This pure and simple racism included the economic destruction of Detroit and the locating of almost all new auto plants in North America away from concentrations of black labor. Ever since the GM plant was built in Lordstown, 50 miles from Youngstown, in 1968. Capitalism is death. Capitalism endangers the entire planet by cooking the earth. What we need to fight for jobs. We need to fight for health care. And what we need to fight for is a socialist revolution. We need to fight for socialism, which is nothing more than peopleism, where everybody has a job, where everybody has health care, because nobody profits off human misery. So we need to fight for socialism, fight for communism, long live Marxism, and we need to study it so we can fight the capitalist class.